is a presentation of the Match Talk Podcast Network.
Defense Soap revolutionized athletic hygiene in 2005 with the introduction of a bar soap containing natural ingredients proven to be effective against skin infections common to wrestlers. Today, Defense Soap leads the world in sports hygiene innovation with a complete line of bar soaps, shower gels, and body wipes that contain high-grade tea tree, eucalyptus, and peppermint oils. Defense Soap. Defend what you have built at DefenseSoap.com. Hello, wrestling fans. It's time for the World Wrestling Resource Podcast. The World Wrestling Resource was made that you as a wrestler, parent, coach, or fan can have access to all the resources of the very best in the world of wrestling. I'm three-time wrestling writer and broadcaster of the year, Jason Bryant, and I want you to join me, along with John McGovern and world champions Terry Brands and Dennis Hall, as we talk training tips, topical discussion, mental preparation, and more on the World Wrestling Resource Podcast. World Wrestling Resource is sponsored by Defense Soap. Find World Wrestling Resource on Facebook at facebook.com/World Wrestling Resource and follow us on Twitter at WWRESO. And, of course, on the web at worldwrestlingresource.com. Now on to the show as we join John McGovern, Terry Brands, and Dennis Hall. Episode 68 of the World Wrestling Resource Podcast. Jason Bryant here with you. Today, we're going to visit with LeRoy Gardner, the head coach at the University of the Ozarks in Arkansas, and Robert Hollywood Hemingway, the head wrestling coach at Allen University in Columbia, South Carolina. Both of these gentlemen been coaching at new programs. They're in the Southeast, and both are also African-American head coaches. There are not a whole lot of African-American wrestling coaches at any level across college wrestling, but we'll talk about a number of topics. But first, let's get some introductions. LeRoy, you're a Wartburg guy. You're from Minnesota. Those two things don't really seem to jive, but just give us a little background for those who don't know anything about who LeRoy Gardner is.
Yeah, definitely, man. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here. Grateful for the opportunity. Grew up right outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota, wrestled there. Played a lot of basketball and football before I came to wrestling, which I'll talk about a little later. But then went down to, took a right turn there and headed south and went to Wartburg. And, I think that's one of the things for me is kind of a defining thing is, if everyone's going right, usually I'm the guy looking to like, hey, why is the crowd going one way? And I want to do something different. I think that, fast forward to me ending up in Arkansas, starting this program down here, or picking it up after it started. And, a lot of people in my peer group were like, hey, man, what are you doing down in Arkansas? Why don't you come back to Iowa, come back to Minnesota or do something like that? And I was like, man, this is really interesting to me. And so, I think it's kind of that path has always been one where, I want to go where there's not been a trail and we cut some trails through. Been here this is my third season, and glad to be here and, we're growing. And so, got a wife and my wife and I've been married 18 years, got a 15-year-old son who doesn't wrestle. And I'm good with it, but, yeah, man, just grateful for every day, man, helping these kids find out their best.
So what LeRoy did here is he buried the lead. He's multiple-time All-American at Wartburg, pretty good. Never won a state title in high school. Places at juniors, junior world teamer. So that's the stuff you just kind of conveniently skirted over.
Yeah, I was fortunate to enjoy wrestling at Wartburg. Won a national title there, won a team title. And then like you said, I got a chance to go overseas and wrestle some as part of the Greco path. And I think the highest I ever achieved, I was sitting fifth on the ladder, got fifth at World Team Trials. And, once our son was born, that changed the game for me. And, I had to step away from competing, but, love everything that all gave to me. And, like I said, got to see the world, go to JB's favorite place in the world, Tashkent, Uzbekistan. And
yeah, so... we'll talk about that later. All right, Coach Hemingway, you're recently coming off a book you published called I'm Black, Let Me Wrestle. And through that book, you chronicle your journey where you discovered wrestling. You're a military brat. You explain that in the story, how getting orders, and that helped you go from sport to sport, kind of like LeRoy talked about playing football and basketball. Then you discovered wrestling. So, give us the 25,000-foot view of how you got into your career with wrestling and coaching now at Allen University in South Carolina.
Same thing, I think, for being here as well. Journey took a crazy turn, like you said, it shows in the book, but basic military family, discovered wrestling after taking a drastic thing I didn't like in football. That's called playing it at the time, I believe. But it led me to wrestling. came here military to South Carolina, ended up leaving in South Carolina, there being a military guy. Got on the wrestling mat, started just learning how to be a wrestler before anything. Became a state champion, Greco-Roman champion, a lot of accolades. But the most important thing is I became a better person. And when I say that, is touching kids' lives. So, wrestling became more or less me trying to help young kids get to the next level with the sport that God had blessed me with, which was wrestling. During the time, I was coaching high school at a local district here, winning on every level of the high school, but just wanted to, get into that college area. I said, saw a college down the street called Allen University, man, put a proposal together, went and talked to the people of power, and we've been running 3 years as a club team and 2 years as a sanctioned team as of now, and doing real well. I had a national qualifier. And also, like you said, getting kids to graduate. We got kids that are on all of the boards at our school, whether it's a president, SGA. So the program is going good. Like you said, we're the only NAIA program, basically African-American program. But the key to it is we're graduating kids. This is our first graduating class, which is a blessing. So that's where I'm at. I got a wife who is a big inspire along with my daughter. And I got 3 boys as well. They were wrestlers, champions as well. Did all the circuits from the AAUs to the USAs to the folk style and did real well. So now I carry the torch. We're running with Allen University now. And like I said, we'll get into it. And I did write a book too. So we can go over there, I guess, when you're ready. That's it.
I'll start with it right now because I just finished it yesterday. It came through. I sat there and I know Coach McGovern, who pretty much spearheads this program, go, hey, we're going to have LeRoy and Hemingway on. I'm like, okay. And you had emailed me about the book prior to the NCAA championships. I'm like, all right, I have a chance. Now I guess I had to read it quicker than I anticipated. So I sat there, ordered it, got it, sat down, read it yesterday. And it's not a long book. It's a short biopic, so to speak, or biopic, however you want to say it. In terms of, your journey, you're not really super big on going into the minutia of it. You kind of tell a good story, like how you discovered wrestling. Well, what was the first reason that made you want to sit down and say, I want to write a book about my life in wrestling, or my foundations in wrestling, so to speak?
Well, basically, like you said, it was a journey. And when I say that, I wanted to write a book where kids understood, of all ages and even adults, but basically for the kids, because that's why it's so short. I always call it the 40-page or more, because some kids don't want to sit down and get educated, but I know if you put something short, it will hit them and then move on. So the purpose was that basically was just to get my life story out that made me successful even here today in the book.
Yeah, it's not a hard read too. I think you can get it off lulu.com. And actually, why don't you just give us a plug on where you can find it? Because I honestly think that people, it's like I said, it's a quick read. It's something that, you can sit down during a lunch hour and knock out and really get a greater understanding of who you are and where you came from in terms of, a lot of people can identify with being a military brat. They can identify with discovering a new sport and having to make friends at different places and having to leave the girl behind that you just start. Yeah, you're just like, oh yeah. So, where can they find the information on the book?
Yes, definitely. You can go on lulu.com and you can just www.lulu.com and go on to shop and then search and put in search. It's called I'm Black, Let Me Wrestle by Robert Hollywood Hemingway, author.
I know it's a great read. There are authors named Hemingway. You're just you're another one in a long line of writing Hemingway things. Now, go into LeRoy. Let's go back to your background a little bit. And you told me a story that your dad had quite the athletic background and kind of has a notoriety here in the state of Minnesota.
Yeah, definitely. And I kind of had to live up to that a little bit. But yeah, my dad was played basketball at St. Paul Central. And then was the first African-American from the state of Minnesota, born and raised, to get a full athletic scholarship for basketball at the University of Minnesota. And, played all 4 years. And there's like a legend that goes around in the playground that him as like a 14, 15, 16-year-old and a group of other friends of his that were also in high school beat some of the Minnesota guys in a pickup game at one of the parks. And that legend still travels around in St. Paul. But, so that was, growing up, I had those kind of that understanding from the time I was about, 12 and start paying attention better to, my plans. And so I played football and basketball growing up. He also played football over there until he broke his leg at St. Paul Central, and he's in the St. Paul Central Hall of Fame as well. So yeah, that was kind of the legacy, and we share the same name. So it's still the case where I'll go places in Minneapolis or St. Paul, and even it happened when I started wrestling. I go somewhere and someone say, "Hey, did your dad play basketball at Central or the U?" And I say, "Yeah." And they said, "Oh man," and they insert whatever adjectives they enjoyed about watching him play or whatever, or competed against him. And so that's the legacy that I came up as an athlete with. And I think for a long time I chased that basketball dream until, like I said, there's not too many 5'11", 240-pound four spots walking around. And so when everyone started growing, I stopped playing basketball, and that was about 8th, 9th grade. And so then after that, I started wrestling in 10th grade, and I was like, man, this is what I was supposed to be doing the whole time. But it took a little while because I thought I'm gonna live up to, doing what my dad and my brother did. So yeah, that's the legacy that we have in the state of Minnesota. And he's, he was there helping. His whole career was at the University of Minnesota, except for a break where he coached at MCTC at the time, basketball, and then went, and his whole career he worked his whole life at the University of Minnesota.
So, and what's interesting, you mentioned 5'11", because I was actually about to ask your height, because that means we're about the same height. Your dad measured in at 6'4", so genetically, your career was pretty much doomed when you did not get the height of your father.
No, and that's I always joked with my mom coming up, and and I loved football a lot too, and so as I started to mature and grow, I was like, cool, I'm gonna I'll be if I'm 6'2", that's good, 6'2", 240, I can do a lot of things with that or whatever, even if I don't reach the 6'4", 6'5", but yeah, my mom was only like 5'2". And so I got that side of the family's height. My sister actually is about 5'10". We're about exactly the same height. So she got my dad's side of the family height. But genetically, like I was supposed to be picking up humans and not jumping over them. So.
And Coach Hemingway, you had kind of the same kind of deal, only completely opposite of the spectrum, where you were a little guy, eventually making 112 pounds, but you were a basketball player first, and that was the one thing you both had. You thought you were going to be basketball players before you even discovered wrestling.
Yeah, correct. I'm glad one of the coaches said, hey, you might need to try something else early in the game. So, yeah, that's true. Everybody wants to be Jordan back in the days, I believe. That's the thing. So now I learned a lot. I said, maybe I'm not this. I need to stay on this mat. I mean, that's what my goal was.
Yeah, we had a generation of kids driving the lane with their tongue hanging out, a la his airness. My stepbrother was one of those people trying to drive for the layup with the tongue hanging out. Like, okay, look, nobody's Jordan. Let's not do that. But that's also a testament to what the opportunities that the sport of wrestling brings. That's part of our topic today. Is there's LeRoy. You're on the bigger spectrum. Coach Hemingway, you're on the smaller spectrum, and you both found the same sport in similar means, but regardless of size, it had something for both of you. Coach Hemingway, what was it about the sport of wrestling that kind of drew you in and said, yeah, this is something I feel like I can be successful in?
Well, I believe it was basically the discipline. I seen how guys would, they could definitely, go a whole night without eating. Now, that was kind of crazy. And I said, man, I would never do that. And then I said, wow, I can do it. So, and then the discipline part of it, and I carry it here today as a coach, teach the discipline. We have to make sure the kids are disciplined. You win with discipline. So, and back in the days, I guess when we were wrestling, we used to say, hey, I don't need to eat this. I need to go to bed. I need to sweat. I need to be down by 1.5 pounds by in the morning before I get to school. And time is time to wrestle. I'll be on weight. So discipline was a big part of it, I believe, and it helps me here today with all the kids that I deal with.
LeRoy, you're kind of again on the other side of the spectrum, being an upper weight. You didn't really necessarily have to cut a whole lot, but speaking on what Coach Hemingway was talking about, what was the situation like for you when you got into it and realized, yeah, this is the thing for me?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, I'll say this to a lot of folks, especially when I recruit like brothers, but I think being a little brother is the best training for wrestling that exists. So when I came into the sport, and I think I had a real vivid memory at my first practice coming out, and the varsity heavyweight at the time was a senior, and he went on to play football at Carnegie Mellon, and real strong kid, and he cross-faced me as hard as he could, and busted my lip. And I remember as I'm licking my blood, I said, man, two things occurred to me like in that moment. One was he just gave you his best shot. And then second was, if this sport is about like taking someone's best shot and like keeping coming, like I can do this. And so, I think that for me, it like all lined up, and it helped that I played football and basketball all those years from like, kindergarten, first grade on, because I had good feet and good balance. And I was, relatively strong for like my body weight because I'd always been doing athletics. And so coming into wrestling with that background prepared me really well, in addition to being a little brother, getting pounded on sometimes. And so I just loved it. It was like official. It was like, where has this been all my life? And I think for me, I had a good example of, my brother went to play at Southwest State basketball. And I remember when I was still playing basketball, he was going into his freshman and sophomore years, and he'd come home and work out, and I'd go, he had a little 3-mile route, and I'd go run with him because I wanted to be like him, or I'd go shoot 1,000 shots at the basketball court like him. And so the work ethic part of it was already kind of a part of my life. And so it was easy to just translate that over to wrestling, where it gets really rewarded. I feel like maybe more so than other sports because I'm not worried about a teammate. Like if I do the work, it counts. So that all resonated like a whole bunch with me. It was like, if I work hard, I'm better, and I can take someone's best shot and not give up. I don't quit. So bring me your best. And so that was a real good recipe for me to enjoy some success in the sport, I think.
Now, when we look at the opportunities to go into school and the makeup of the sport of wrestling, LeRoy, you live in you're from Minnesota. I live there now, and you could say the joke. I don't feel comfortable saying it, but what was the joke growing up in Minnesota?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was always a joke. Like it was me. Like when people hear where I'm from, other black folks, it was like, oh, it's you and Prince and Kirby Puckett and at the time Kevin Garnett. They're like, it was like, they're like, why do you live in Minnesota? And so, it was like acknowledgement of, that the Midwest, upper Midwest was settled for the most part by Western European immigrants, and so that wasn't a lot of people with a lot of melanin in their skin. So, that's where that joke was always, it still is prevalent to this day when I say I'm from Minneapolis, and people are like, oh man, it's just Prince up there. But yeah, that's where, I heard that as a common kind of refrain, and, and it's fun to recognize and acknowledge that. And I think that's one of the things, when I was talking about my journey in wrestling, there was definitely times, we show up and we'd go down to like, I'd go drive on my own down to like Casson Vanderbilt, Minnesota for a Greco and freestyle tournament. And, I'd show up and it'd be like me, Marcus Levesser, Jafari Veneer, Jamel Tidwell, and Kerry Veneer. Like there was literally, and there was like two other kids, right? But that was it. The only other, folks that sort of looked like me. And now, I think that's where, and that kind of continues throughout my high school career. But it's, at a certain point, okay, and so what? I still got to go wrestle and compete and enjoy this and get to know all the guys that I'm on my team with. But it was definitely like, you get used to being kind of the exception a little bit in at least one or multiple elements, right? And so that was one way, that I experienced it coming up. And I think, especially that's 20 years ago now, wrestling wasn't as diverse as it is now. And I think that, it's just a fact, and that's why I always, I try to recruit Jamel down to Wartburg, and like, I always try to make sure like, hey, let's get these guys to college and wrestle. I tried to recruit Jafari, and like, hey, let's get to the next level, get that degree done, and I think that's the recognition. And you look at like the mission of Beat the Streets, for example, I flew out there from Arkansas last year to go help with the camp because I really believe that, if there's plenty of kids running around, plenty of athletes running around in places where they didn't have family members that wrestled, like I didn't have anybody who knew wrestling or had an uncle who wrestled. I didn't have that. All we did was play basketball and football for reasons. And so now you've got kids in, urban environments who haven't been exposed to the blue collar nature that is wrestling. And once we find it, like, they get exposed to it, man, there's a lot of kids running around that could be great and benefit greatly from the sport. And so I think that's like, for me, that's a cool thing to be able to beat the drum on. It's just like, hey, it's never bad if we get more wrestlers, that's never bad. So whether it's, women, African Americans, Asians, let's get more wrestlers, and that's kind of where I fall on that.
And as far as, Coach Hemingway, you explain in your book that you're a military family and a lot like wrestling, a lot of wrestling people, like, we don't want to see color. We don't want to see disability. We don't want to see, we're wrestlers. We're all of the same cloth. And we like to beat that drum, just like, the military. You talk about, you're a family, regardless of what demographic you make up, genetically or any other way, shape, or form. Wrestling and the military seem to have that in common. When you discovered the sport of wrestling, was it in Virginia or in Pennsylvania where you discovered it for the first time?
It was Virginia.
Okay, so
Virginia.
Norview High School in Norfolk, Virginia, and let's just say it's a racially diverse community. The city of Norfolk is, and when LeRoy is one of just a handful in his area. What was it like for you walking into the wrestling room with Coach Kenny Whitley? What was that racial makeup like, and was it welcoming, or was it kind of like off-putting initially?
Well, when I walked in the wrestling room, it was welcome. I will say that. It's because at the time I didn't know what was going on. I just seen guys in there with sweat tops on. Now I know singles, doubles, and all that good stuff, which I wasn't aware of it. So they basically drew me in like a brotherhood. Ken Willie, one thing I will say with him, he always nurtured you. Even here today, that's just him. And he said, hey, I'm going to teach you. I'm going to show you. And then I just bought into what they were doing, And like I said, these days when LeRoy was just saying about the different race diversity, that's all well and good. But as a coach myself, being in the game, you see all types. But my thing now is what I always learned, and my dad and mom, they have taught me one thing. You don't look on the outside, you look what's inside. And I carry that no matter what. You'll see it on my walls. You'll see it all over. You never look on the outside. You look at the inside. So diversity was out there, but at the same time, I got to see what's in your heart. And even as wrestlers, we used to see, you can look at a kid and say, well, he has no heart. We're going to see if we can make him have heart. That's just a coaching drive. And I used to use this term, hey, he ain't got no heart. Let's go. So, but whatever's on the inside is more emotional, and that's what I carry with me. So back to the question with Norview is, I was welcomed, and I was pretty good.
And you moved to South Carolina. What was that makeup like? And you had said in your book that it was more of a predominantly African-American school. So as LeRoy says, there were more people who looked like you in that respect.
Exactly. It's the same thing. It was being from a military. We've seen all types of people. Like LeRoy was saying, the same thing. Got Asian. We had Filipino. We was all over. So racism, if it was there, we never saw it, to be honest with you. Is because when I came into school, my mentality was, hey, I've been all over the world. I was born in San Diego, California. So when I come over here, I've been to Philadelphia. I think we've been to 35 states out of 50 due to my dad being the ejection seat. He was over the planes that eject guys in wars or whatever it is. So we saw all types. So when I got to the predominantly black school, my main focus was basically to get on the wrestling mat at the time. But if racism was there, we never experienced it because we never saw color, period. We just wasn't raised that way,
And I think for a lot of people in the sport of wrestling, we want that to be the case. We want that to be the rule versus the exception. Of course, every sport, every culture, every demographic of group you can think of, there's probably going to be the ignorance out there that still kind of thinks a different way. But I want to shift this a little bit because you talked about around the world, and LeRoy has an interesting story. His wife, he met in Uzbekistan, and we've actually discussed that on the old Division III show, the Ice Hour. She was born in Azerbaijan. So when we think of race relations in this country, we have kind of what we look at as what happened from the American South, the Civil War, the civil rights movement and whatnot. But LeRoy, you've got an interesting, aspect of how race relations work globally because your wife's from Uzbekistan.
Well, yeah, I think, it sort of had required me as a young man, to like evaluate just like, Hollywood's military experiences real quickly. Your perspective shifts from whatever your unique experience is to a more broader perspective. And, the first time I went overseas, I remember being on the bus and Coach Ike Anderson was with us. And, the kids on the bus come up and they're trying to like rub off the brown on his skin, and, just because it was so novel to them. It wasn't a racist thing. It was just novelty, and with that perspective, after I met my wife and we got married, there was a part of helping her understand both the history of the founding in the United States of America that includes our history with race relations, but also understanding, some broader conflicts and struggles that, they have in the former Soviet republics. And, uniquely for her specifically, like we would book tickets and, she was born in Azerbaijan, so she couldn't fly through Armenia. Like we could never fly through Yerevan, because, in her passport, it said she was born in Azerbaijan before she's a citizen. And so, that was something where I was like, man, there's a place that you can't even go just because it says where you were born somewhere else and they had a war at one point. And so, it brought into perspective. But I think the biggest thing about that, and this is something that I've found reinforced everywhere, is, no matter where I go, and I know how to say it in Russia, ya sportsmen, like if you're a sportsman and you're a wrestler, like there's a fraternity that goes across language, that goes across color, that goes across everything. And that's the beautiful part about our sport. And I think, I definitely experienced it. And, more recently, like when I was in Afghanistan, because, it's still part of the armed forces. When I was in 2014, once my interpreters found out that I was a wrestler, like they gave me the nickname Palawan. And then they were legitimately trying to set up an opportunity for me to go wrestle in the Maiwan school that ended up getting blown up there in Kabul. And, they respected the sportsmen. Again, it's that fraternity of brotherhood for wrestling and the struggle that we all go through and that one hand to hand kind of warrior mentality. And so, they were like, they respected me more than they respected someone who wasn't a sportsman, or wasn't a wrestler. And so, for good or bad, I experienced it in a real positive way. I told them, hey guys, I can't go to your wrestling club and compete, for security reasons, but I'd love to. But it was just good to be, once they found out that, it was like, they were very, very much more informal and, and like I said, it just reinforced that global fraternity that exists for wrestling. And like, Coach Hollywood was saying, it's about who are you? I want to know who you are, regardless of anything else. I want to know who you are, and I want to know about your heart. So that's been my experience, and like I said, it just helped me get a global perspective. I think that's why USA Wrestling and UWW and those experiences, because I would have not had those had I not pursued this sport to the best I could. And I think it's like a life-changing thing for these athletes and these young men and women to go overseas and see what life is like other places and meet new people. I still have, it's funny, when I went to U23s this year, helping with Charlotte on the women's freestyle team, there was a coach from one of the Iranian coaches was a guy that was in my bracket at Junior Worlds, and he remembered me. Like I remembered him. And so, we didn't wrestle against each other, but it's funny that here is 20 years later, and you can be at a tournament and you see, and now we're all a little heavier and a little balder maybe. And so, but it's just that fraternity. So, it's really a beautiful thing, man.
One thing, the first time I actually witnessed something like you experienced with the people coming up and touching was, we were in 2012. We were at the Junior World Championships, and that year when I was working at USA Wrestling, the National Coaches Education Program would take, kind of their state leaders or the coaches that really were performing or something. I'm not quite sure how it happened, but they would go to the World Championships typically, but during the Olympic years, they take them to the Junior Worlds because, Olympics are, they're a different body entirely. So Cornell Robinson's a coach in Missouri, and he's a big guy. He wears his bling. I mean, he embraces it. He's walking around, and then all of a sudden he gets swarmed. He's getting everywhere we went. And it was the first time I was like, holy crap, Cornell. Like, he goes, man, I could run for president over here. I mean, making a joke out of it, but it's like, when you see it happen for the first time, you don't see that, here where we grew up. So it's kind of one of those things. It's like, it does take you back to realize that, yeah, we are a real melting pot here in this country. We've got that going for us, and, it's a great thing, but still, sometimes you go to pockets of the world where there is very little diversity, where everybody looks like you. And it's definitely an eye opener when you're coming in from the outside. Coach Hemingway, now I want to switch gears a little bit and focus on opportunities in this sport. And we talk about the growth of women's wrestling. We're seeing opportunities for the girls, college programs popping up. But one demographic of our community that does seem somewhat underserved is the wrestlers of color, the Latino population, with the California schools like Fullerton dropping wrestling. It eliminated a state school where populations were very big in the Latino communities, which populate almost all the lower weight, a ton of the lower weight classes in California. When we get to LeRoy talking to me the other day before we went on the show, saying if there was an HBCU that had Division I wrestling, he would have totally considered, if Howard had a team when he was, coming out, he was considering that. Now you're at a place that is the only 4-year institution in this country that is a historically black college and university that has a wrestling program. When it comes to the opportunity of exposing the sport of wrestling to African-American males who may have only grown up in families that knew about football or basketball, what has the biggest challenge for you been in even going back to your days as a high school coach, in recruiting young African-Americans into the sport and making them fall in love with it?
Well, we have been doing good with recruiting. It's just getting, well, let me say it like this. We're doing good with recruiting, and our program's growing. It's already there. We know that. But my thing is to get it out to some of the other coaches. We have all these coaching clinics, and I said it before, when I go to the Daytonas, we went to Fort Lauderdale with some of the big-time wrestling, USA Wrestling. And I believe that we have to have classes. We all have mentorships. They do a wonderful job. Michael Moore, they put on a good promotion. The whole weekend looks great. But I'm still waiting for that African-American class. I mentioned it one time last year when I was there. I was talking to, because you need to have African-Americans in there as mentors. You know, when I say mentors, teach a class about Africa and what they expect. There's some good, outstanding white coaches all over the world, but sometimes they do get African-American, which they don't know what to do with the guy. Maybe he's just feeling bad. He was sick. His parents, something's going on in his life, and they don't know how to deal with him. Why not, when we have these big conferences, and I said it before, is bring some people like myself or LeRoy, and we sit and help these coaches that are white or Hispanic or whatever the race is, understand our people the best way we can so they can ask these questions. So at Allen, we're doing so good with recruiting now, and a lot of the parents that are coming aboard, they used to wrestle, like LeRoy said, if you had it back in the days. We got parents, dads that wrestle for the Morehouses back in the days, the Morgan States, the Livingston Colleges, Delaware State. Some of these programs have folded. We're getting the kids now because their dad sees that there's a hope that, hey, this program is here to stay, and Allen is here to stay. That's our goal.
When it comes to the dynamic of an HBCU, it is very historically relevant. It's cultural. You know, if you can look up the history on why certain places are where they're at, like Hampton University is a beautiful campus there. I grew up minutes from it. I grew up near Norfolk State. So I grew up around HBCUs. I'm even an HBCU football fan. Like I was telling LeRoy yesterday before we talked, I watch the Bayou Classic. I watch Southern and Grambling every year. It's one of those football games. Like, yep. I watch that every year. I watch Duke Carolina in basketball. I watch the Bayou Classic. I watch, the MEAC and the SWAC. I follow them, the CIAA. I pay attention to the black college sports in that regard, especially football, because you go to an HBCU football game, and Sinbad stand-up actually joked about this back in the 90s. You don't go for the game. You go for the band. It's an experience. I mean, the classics that draw 40, 50,000 people all across the South and the Southeast. There is a culture within its own, and it's not just color at an HBCU. There's a whole, the fraternities, the step shows, the battle of the bands. It is movie Drumline touches on it a little bit. It is so much of an experience. And wrestling is not included in those schools. We've lost the last one was Delaware State prior to Allen. But LeRoy, you had said as an athlete, the opportunity to go to an HBCU wasn't there. What was it about an HBCU that would draw you or people, like you said, people like you to an HBCU?
Well, I think, for me, specifically growing up in the upper Midwest, and, I've got some of my best friends growing up, and we all ran together, hung out together. Now, they weren't wrestlers, but a lot of them went to Morehouse and Howard and stuff like that. And, for me, it was one, sort of some of my peer groups, like, at Hopkins High School, a lot of people went to Kansas University or University of KU, and like my peer group, a couple of my friends, like went out to, a bunch of them went to Morehouse. And so when I started looking at schools, it was like, man, I that's not an option, after Howard dropped their program. It was like, I can't, there's no option for me.
Delaware State was it, and it really wasn't, let's just say the leadership at that university really didn't do that program any favors.
Right. So it was, So for me, it was not, it was like, okay, I can't go look at Morehouse with my buddies. So I need to look at it. And I applied at Northern Iowa, Minnesota, Wartburg, and Augsburg. And, the thing that drew me out there was, like I said, just that ability to go experience all the things you just said about the Southwest Classic that I wouldn't get at Wartburg, I wouldn't get at Minnesota. And then also, just the breadth of experiences that all the African-American community will bring to that. Because not everyone's from Chicago, not everyone's from, Alabama or wherever. There's a diversity of experience, just like there's diversity of experience across all people. And so, like, that's a cool thing to be able to go and get so, like, one of the things that we talk about higher education being a value. is like going to get experience with people who aren't like you, or have different perspectives than you, different experiences than you. And so for me, that was a chance to get both, right? I get people around folks who have some shared experience for sure, right? Just given the fact of being African-American growing up in this country, but then also from all over the place, from, and potentially all over the world. So, I looked at it, and then, like I said, I was like, yeah, there's no window there. There's no opportunity for me to go there.
I'm looking back at Delaware State. I remember I was covering wrestling for the Daily Press back in Newport News, and there was a kid from Heritage High School named Devon Alston, and he was a state place winner for my district, and that district wasn't really, really good in the AAA side. I'm talking to him, interviewed him for the paper. I'm like, so are you looking to go to college? He's like, yeah, I want to go to A&T, but they don't have wrestling. I'm like, whoa, you want to go to HBCU? I got in touch with the coach at Delaware State. I go, Darren, I got a guy for you. Once at HBCU. And, sure enough, the next year we see Delaware State comes to the Old Dominion Invitational. There's Devon Alston wrestling for Delaware State. I'm like, all right, cool. Opportunity. Opportunity meets desire. And it's just like if somebody wants to go to a liberal arts college or they want to go to a Catholic institution, it's the same thing. It's not just like, I want to be only around my people. That's not essentially what the HBCU experience is like. As I explained, the Battle of the Bay, Hampton versus Norfolk State is a riot of a good time. So, those opportunities, but I'm looking at it from Coach, Coach Hemingway. You're down there in South Carolina, and imagine if you look at some of the schools that dot the Southeast and the Deep South. You're like, what opportunities would open for young African American wrestlers if a Tuskegee had wrestling, if an Alabama A&M had wrestling, or like a North Carolina Central or an A&T, Morehouse, which we've mentioned a couple times, which is an all male school. There were 3 liberal arts all male schools in this country. Wabash, Hampton, Sydney, and Morehouse. And at one time, Hampton, Sydney, and Wabash had wrestling. Was like, well, what's up with Morehouse? We got to get them. But, the opportunity to go to an HBCU in the South is more part of the high school education. Imagine if Tuskegee had a program based on what just general history knows about that institution.
Right. Well, basically, you said the same thing. We got South Carolina State, Morris, Voorhees. There's a lot of surrounding colleges, FAMU, a lot of those. It would bring so much because, like you said, you talked about the football aspect. I would love to see when you bring the wrestling aspect of how we have a good time. You're graduating kids. I mean, it's just ideal. They used to have the MEAC back in the days and stuff like that. So a lot of that stuff I was pushing. I want them to come back. I think it's time. I think some of the presidents, to get in there and just figure out how they can make it happen. They took a chance on us. And like you said, it's just, we had to crawl to get to where we're at. But at the same time, we're trying to grow. And at the same time, when you go to these different tournaments, you're seeing these young kids, whether they're African-American, white kids, or Latino. I keep saying all of it. Man, a singlet is a singlet. I don't care how you look at it. I'm going to put one on you if you're ready to wrestle. That's it. So I could kill it, and I'll throw you a headgear too if it comes down to it. But my goal also is just to try to bring what you said. You named it. You were in Norfolk. Virginia. We had it in Virginia. When I left Norview, I remember Buddy Lee, some of those heroes with the jump rope, all those guys used to hang with when I was young. So I see the difference in it. But my main focus now, like you said, is to bring this HBCU back. It's so much needed. Our kids need it. Like you said, I go back to the same thing that we can talk all day about basketball. Every kid ain't shooting jumpers. Every kid ain't tackling all the time. You might as well add a blast double to it, and you're good to go.
Now, one thing you two also have in common is you're at non-Division I schools. Now, Hollywood, you're at NAI. LeRoy, you're at Division III. And these are programs that are being added for various different means. Hollywood, you'd mentioned Mike Moyer. I know the NWCA, I used to work for them. Moyer's on the phone constantly calling. I mean, the NAIA has gone from 25 programs to I think we're going to be in the mid 60s next year that are championship eligible, with 6 or 7 new teams coming in next year. And, while we may not get a Howard, we may not get a Hampton University, at least at the Division I level, but at Division II, Division III, the NAIA, which enrollment kind of drives the school, you're both at schools that are adding programs for that reason. And LeRoy, what's the situation been like? I mean, you didn't start the program there at Ozarks, but what is the school seen as a benefit to adding the sport of wrestling to its infrastructure?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Coach Zastro, started it, and I was happy to kind of come in and help further. That was the main thing. Was like, he was like, hey, I put my heart and soul in this, and I don't want it to go downhill. And I was like, man, I'll do my best to honor that same energy and everything that you put into it. So, as an institution, like just on a metric, situation, I mean, we go from, having, before we had the wrestling program, 0 wrestlers, right? 0 students here for wrestling. And, last year we started the year with 40 student athletes. And so just from and we're a small school, we're less, we're right at about 900 students. So when you talk about just wrestling having 40 student athletes, that percentage is that's like non-trivial, And so I think that's been great. And I think further, it's an opportunity for someone to consider all the beneficial things that this institution offers. We're a liberal arts school, so it's a way for someone to have access to the benefits that this institution offers, and also still continue to compete at a high level as a student athlete in the NCAA. And so that's really, for me, what I pitch to all my student athletes. Hey, that you got a chance to come here and keep doing it, and be at the NCAA tournament. Go reach the goals that you have for yourself at the highest levels. And so I think that's been the benefits the school has wrought from the development of the wrestling program and the growth of it. And, it's on campus. It's cool because we're growing fans, and we have our duels and fill up the gym. And, that's how you get people in. I tell my guys all the time, hey, like, our job is to put out entertaining, a good product, right? Wrestle your best because it matters. It's not just you're wrestling to win. Like, go get one more takedown because we want someone to be excited and cheer, and that's a cool thing. Like, when you think about, it's not just about you, right? It's about the sport. And so I think that's where the school's benefited from that. And not just, enrollment is definitely, at the end of the day, it's a bottom line number that the school needs to operate across the country. But, just adding our energy to the campus, and wrestlers are, we're a little different, right? And so I think it's been a positive for the school, and that's I'm really glad that grateful they did. We're looking at I really am advocating hard for us to add women's.
And here's one thing that also isn't lost on the fact is Arkansas didn't have high school wrestling 10 years ago. And I'm actually starting a program with the University of Arkansas Little Rock to document their rise. But that story starts with the rise of high school wrestling. And you're trying to build a program where there is very little wrestling culture to grow from. So, what's that hurdle been like in terms of, opportunity and drawing people to Clarksville, Arkansas?
It's a great place, man. The school on the hill here. We're right off 40, so it's convenient in that regard. It's not as hard as you would think. I always ask guys 2 questions. Hey, I'm asking you, 1, to come to Arkansas, and I'm asking you to pay a little bit for school because I can't give you a full athletic scholarship. And so if any of those, if we can't get past those 2 things, then good luck with everything else. But for us, the challenge culturally, like wrestling wise, is the things that we take for granted as competitors and coaches. Like, for example, in a PA or Iowa, these student athletes maybe have demonstrated and experienced what it's like to commit year round to a sport and struggled. I think that's one thing, is like sometimes when student athletes who haven't had to struggle, like a guy who's really good in Texas, he may never have to learn how to get out of the bottom, because he hasn't had to. And I think that's something. Those are some real differences from a cultural standpoint, and just trying to, and I, like, a good example, I had a kid on the team, and he had to go to work, and he missed practice sometime for work. And finally, I was like, hey man, you understand that, I support that. Like, if you got to pay, you got to do what you got to do. But was that what you did in high school? And he's like, yeah, it was not a big deal. And I was like, okay, so I'm not frustrated that he didn't know that the expectation is that, like, this is like your job from October to March. And so I had to explain that to him. But those are things culturally that we take for granted in places where wrestling has a history, is like, they know what it's like to wrestle year round and commit, because that's what it'll take to be your best, right? Whether you're doing freestyle and Greco and all this stuff, it's very rare there's student athletes that can achieve their best only competing from October to March. And so those are the kind of nuanced things that I think sometimes are not always appreciable if you're from the outside looking in. I think there's, everyone always, me coming from the Midwest and Wartburg with the success that program has had. There are things that and I think Milboy told me at best. He was like, hey, you're not building another Wartburg, you're building Ozarks. And he's like, so don't try and do the things Like there's some things that don't apply because when I came to Wartburg, we were 10 years into successful championships, and all the things that happened. It wasn't year 0 or year 2. And so I think that's the cultural things that are different. It's just, the student athletes, we're not only teaching wrestling, we're teaching what it's like to be committed 100% to wrestling and what it's like to struggle and have to learn positions. And maybe your best takedown in high school is not good and not good in college, even though all your input feedback said, hey, this is the best thing I do. And so those are some things that guys we help guide them through, is like those struggles and overcoming that and learning and growing, and I think that's the benefit, again, the beauty of the sport.
All right, Coach Hemingway, I'm going to throw a stat at you that I just looked up to make sure that this makes sense. Okay, so right now there are, at least starting the next season, there will be 10 college wrestling teams in the state of South Carolina. 2 of those are women. One's a junior college. You're the NAIA. Then we got Coker, Lander, Limestone, Newberry in Division II, Presbyterian starting a program Division I, and the Citadel in Division I. Now, prior to 2000, how many of those teams existed in South Carolina? The answer, only the Citadel. So in the last 18, 19, 20 years, 9 of the 10 opportunities in South Carolina are brand new. So, and you're one of those opportunities. What has it been like to try to, kind of ingrain a wrestling culture in a state that's got wrestling tradition? It's just not really talked about a whole lot. Now you've got opportunities to keep kids in state, whether it be at your institution, whether they want to go to the Citadel for a military experience or be part of Mark Cody's new program, men's or women's at Presbyterian. I mean, what's it like and what's the wrestling growth been like, at the grassroots level through the high schools in South Carolina? Because we've seen it at the college level.
Well, basically, I've been seeing a lot of the South Carolina wrestlers, they go to national competitions. They go to get experience, and I think that's why a lot of the other coaches see these guys and can recruit them. So us having these teams coming in this year and just growing in South Carolina, it's a plus. I can only go back to, Allen University. I'm the founder of the program. I started it. Richard Allen was funded. He's a legend. I mean, the AME churches. I mean, our whole university basically is history. Some of the guys who walked on this campus is unbelievable back in the civil rights days and everything else. So when we put together our wrestling program, we go to try to get the top quality kids, man, good students. Like Lee said about the enrollment, our enrollment's been good every year since we started, even as a club team. Now, bringing the different sports up to par, for people to start noticing us, that was my goal set from day one. I need to get these people, like you said, we're going to start wrestling the Citadels. We're going to compete against the Cokers, the Newberries, all the local people, D1s, D2. But we're adding sports at Allen as well. Soccer's coming. We just started our football, rebirth of the football. Looking at baseball, we got a lot of sports that's being added. So, our step is going to start climbing higher as well. My focus with my athletes now is just to make sure we have the great kids. We got some, I tell my wrestlers the same thing, Lee. We let our light shine on campus. People know who the wrestlers are. We're the kids that say, hey, don't pick that up, professor. Let me take that to class for you. So whatever we put out on our athletes, it's going to be quality, but at the same time, they're going to get that degree is what they came there for and become a growing and a prospective young man in this world and society, because we're losing a lot of kids these days.
One last thing I want to touch on when it comes to, and it's not just the, racial makeup of your particular universities, but it's a sport as a whole. And I think it comes with the territory of people who aren't coming from wrestling backgrounds. If you grow up in wrestling, you kind of know about Wartburg. You kind of know about Augsburg at Division III level. Right now, you're coming through Grandview is crushing the NAI. You know about, the programs at Central Oklahoma in Division II. And the some of these power smaller programs. But when, LeRoy, you're calling a kid who, one, may not be able to find Clarksville, Arkansas on a map, not because they don't know how to read a map, but just they don't know where the heck Clarksville is. And you have to explain to them what University of the Ozarks is, or Coach Hemingway, you have to explain where Allen University is in Columbia, South Carolina, getting them to get past I've never heard of that. It's not a Michigan State. It's not a Minnesota. It's not a big school. How do you get those kids? And what has been the recruiting pitch to say, yeah, you want to compete in a sport? There's hundreds of small schools that you've never even heard of that would love to have you on their campus. Yeah.
I mean, I think you talk to any student athlete, for the most part, I would say, I think greater than 50% of them are attracted to a school initially by their interaction with the leadership of that program. Like for me, that's what put it over the top for me to go wrestle for Coach Miller. And so my job as a leader for our program and in service to this institution is to go reach as many of these potential student athletes as I can, strive to have a positive interaction with them, answer any questions, concerns they have about the process, because that one thing that it's clear to me, a lot of student athletes and their families don't know what the process is to end up at an institution, what the recruiting process looks like and things like that. So a lot of times, I've been in a position where I said, hey, regardless of where you go, if you have questions about this process, I'm here to help you, even if you don't end up being at my institution. Like I want to see your student athlete continue on. And so I think, just making sure we have a positive interaction, let them know what we're about. If a kid's looking at going to a Michigan State or Minnesota, Twin Cities campus, I'm probably usually, if that's their goal, they want to be at a huge school, like I can't offer them that, so let them know what we're about and see if that's interesting to them. But a lot of kids, the only thing they respond, like they're like, Coach, it doesn't matter. I'm going to study physical education and I want to wrestle for you. And I think that's where, that's my job as a leader and a servant to this institution, say, hey, here's what I'm about. Here's what we're about. I like what I see so far about you. Is there a fit here? And I think that's the challenge. That's the gauntlet that's thrown down. Recruiting never ends. Like everywhere I go, I'm someone's got a cousin. Hey, my nephew wrestles. How old is your nephew? Things like that. But yeah, that's kind of, I think the challenge is just letting them know what we're about, because I think with wrestling, especially unless a kid is looking and getting Division I money somewhere, there's way more kids that aspire to wrestle in college than do. And I think some of those kids don't think about it. And we see it sometimes with the kids like, hey, if I can't go to Oklahoma State, then I can't wrestle. And they don't understand, especially in the South, there's not a lot of other opportunities historically that have been real successful. There's pockets of it, but they don't have a Augsburg or Wartburg in their backyard. So I've got to tell them what we're about. And it's going to be hard, and it's good kids. It's not like high school plus, right? There's kids that are very, very talented, and so I think it's multi-layered, and it's a wonderful opportunity as a coach to go solve that.
Coach Hemingway, going to give you the last word on that topic.
Yeah, same thing. I will echo the first part, is getting to know me, who I am. A lot of guys always see your accolades. I always say that. But see, one thing about me, and I tell a lot of kids, when you come to visit, we're going to tell you the truth, and we're going to let you feel out. When you drive a car, you go to look at a car, you only get a test run. So if I got to just use you as a test run, then I know you're not going to come here. So I got to be able to drive that car for 4 years of graduation. And I'm going to keep that car. And after 4 years is paid off, then I'll go ahead and send you on your way. So my thing is, I look at it like this. When the kids are coming, they look for the D1s. That's natural, and some will be taught, my kids, I thought my kids were D1 at times, that's just dad's mentality, but it has to be a good fit with the coach, and I've been blessed to have a good fit with the guys that we are bringing in. And believe it or not, I am a fiercely Christian value guy. I mean, for God I live, for God I die. I'm not scared to say it. That's been me, and that's why I've been so successful, because I put him first and then I move on. I don't recruit for always the state champion, national qualifier, runner up. I recruit for the spirit of the kid. And if I can get the spirit of the kid, I get all that extra. That's not a point. I get the champions. I get that. But if they have a good spirit to fit into what we're doing here at Allen University, and that's nurturing these kids, getting them to that next level, getting that degree in their hand, being husbands, wives, everything that it comes to have trust in what you're doing at your program. That's what we're about. And if you're here to come in our program, we're going to go ahead and give you 100% all the way till I walk you down that aisle. And that's what it's about.
And with that, we'll wrap up this episode of the World Wrestling Resource Podcast. I'd like to thank our guests, the head coach at the University of the Ozarks in Arkansas, LeRoy Gardner, and the head coach at Allen University in Columbia, South Carolina, Robert Hollingwood Hemingway. You can check out his book, I'm Black, Let Me Wrestle. Order that at lulu.com. Search for Hemingway. Yes, you might even find some Ernest in there, maybe, perhaps. But, gentlemen, I appreciate the time and the insight today on a variety of topics, and best of luck to you guys in your future with your respective programs. Is both of you still looking for that elusive first All-American?
Yeah, we're on the hunt.
You're right.
Thank you, JB.
JB, thank you, sir, man. You're very good. We love you. Thank you.
Subscribe to the World Wrestling Resource Podcast by going to wwrpodcast.com and check it out on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spreaker, or wherever you find your podcasts. World Wrestling Resource at worldwrestlingresource.com.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.